So this being post-Shavuos, and there's so much emphasis on the 10 pronouncements at Sinai, I want to share with you some thoughts about that text. And I make an effort not to say the 10 Commandments, because in no original Jewish literature is that section called the 10 Commandments. And there's a very good reason why it's not called the 10 Commandments, because it doesn't compose 10 Commandments. It's probably 15 or 16, depending upon how you count. It's 10 pronouncements. Now, as an introduction, I would like you to take a look in the Art Scroll on page 509. This will be a lesson in reading and interpretation.
509?
509, yeah. So these are what are sometimes called the 13 attributes of mercy, which Hashem revealed to Moses after the sin of the golden calf. If you start with verse 5, Hashem descended in a cloud and stood with him, Moses, there. He called out the name of Hashem. Hashem passed before him, proclaimed, Hashem, Hashem, God, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abundant in kindness and truth, preserver of kindness for thousands of generations, forgiver of iniquity, willful sin, and effort, and who cleanses. Sounds good, eh? And who cleanses, but does not cleanse completely, recalling iniquity of the parents upon children and grandchildren to the third and fourth generations. How are we supposed to deal with that? Visiting the sin of the fathers on the parents, not to mention the mothers, and on the children. I mean, how are we supposed to deal with that? Isn't that grossly unjust? And then come all theologies trooping in, psychology, sociology, anthropology, ritual and superstition, and the whole panoply of the academic fun and games. But I have a principle I think you have to follow. First, make sure you understand what it says before you start criticizing it, justifying it, explaining it. Understand what it says. Now let's look at it again. In particular, start with verse 7. Preserver of kindness for thousands of generations. I suppose that means if a generation serves God to the extent that it deserves kindness, God will visit that kindness not only in that generation, but for thousands of generations. It will have a forward-looking good effect on many, many generations of descendants. Forgive iniquity, willful sin, and error, who cleanses, not cleanse completely, recalling the iniquities of the parents upon children and grandchildren, the third and fourth generations. Okay, boys and girls, here's a very simple question. Generation 1 is spectacularly good. Generation 2 is spectacularly bad. What does generation 3 get? Well, on the basis of 1, it ought to get kindness. On the basis of 2, it ought to get iniquity. I got it. Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays. Kindness, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Iniquity, and Shabbos take a rest. That's probably not right. There's an open contradiction here. And if you're reading a text which is an open contradiction, don't bring in the ologies, because you haven't got a clue what it means. Now, one of the most depressing things about the 5 books of Moses, all 1,000 pages here, is that it's one book. And in order to understand it well, you really have to read the whole book. I don't try to say it out loud because people get so depressed by it. But Let's take a look at page 409, which is in the context of the 10 pronouncements. The fourth line of English text right in the middle, describing God, who visits the sin of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations. I remember that. That's what it said on 509. But here's an addition. For my enemies. Who shows kindness for thousands of generations. Yeah, that was on 509 also. But, it goes on, to those who love me and observe my commandments. Aha, so it's not willy-nilly. It's not absolute. Generation 1 gets kindness, then all the next 2,000 generations all get kindness. Or if generation 1 is wicked, that the next 4 generations get wickedness. No, only if you read it unrestrictedly and universally would you have a contradiction. But that's not the truth. This is the same phraseology, and it's 100 pages earlier. So the author might just hope that by the time you get to 509, you had 409 in mind. And then it says it depends upon the character of the succeeding generations as to what they get. If they're ones who love God and who perform His commandments, then they merit receiving extra kindness from an antecedent generation going back 2,000 generations. If they are a group who are God's enemies, then they access iniquity, punishment, going back 4 generations. But it all depends upon the generation itself that's receiving. So all of a sudden, it's not brutally unjust and not brutally superstitious and primitive. There might be some sense to it. Furthermore, as the Talmud says, if you check the numbers, you'll see a gigantic prejudice on the side of kindness. Kindness is preserved for thousands of generations. Let's make it the minimum, 2,000. And the punishment is 4. 2,000 to 4 is 500 to 1. The bias on the side of kindness is 5,000 to 1. Well, this greatly reduces the problem, but there's still a little leftover problem. You can understand the appropriateness of adding to the kindness of a generation that's spiritually successful. God can give free gifts. Those of us who are learning the book of Job with the Rambam and suffering the rights of the Rambam have seen this already. No moral complaint against that. But even if a generation is wicked and deserves its own punishment, why would it be right to add the punishment of previous generations to that and increase it, since that's what other people did, not what they did? There are 2 explanations for this, 2 that I know. I'm sure that the literature has more than I know. One is, there's a big difference between a person who commits a transgression in ignorance of the consequences from a person who's done the transgression and seen the consequences. A person who does it in ignorance can plead he didn't appreciate how serious it was. But after you've seen this type of mistake made over and over again, and you've registered the consequence, if you continue to do it, you're much more guilty than the people who started the path. About 2 years ago, that utter villain, Vladimir Putin, made a very ironical remark about the American emphasis today on political correctness and progressive values and monitoring and cancellation culture. Putin said, "We tried that. We know how that works. And now the Americans, the fools, are doing it again." So we did it because we were experimenting. But you're stupid enough to continue to do it when you've seen the consequences. So that's one reason in which later generations might be more guilty than the prior generation. And the second, I think this is the Ramban, those who hold reincarnation, the major reincarnations of a person go down for 4 generations, and then it's scattered out much more thinly throughout the future history. So you'll have a lot of people up to 4 generations who are reincarnations of people who were in the previous generation, that first generation. And a single person can come back as 3 people or 10 people. So you can split the population that way. So that would be 2 reasons for thinking that even the minor problem can be solved. But this shows you that, in fact, this phraseology appears 4 times in the Torah. And the book really has to be read as a whole. So if you're reading a page, because that's how much time you have in the commercial between the first 15 minutes and the last 15 minutes of the television program, you have to get a beer and also look at one page and say, oh, what's the answer to that? Hey, Rabbi, how does that work, Rabbi? You may be in for just a little reminder that there's a whole book there that needs to be read. Okay, that's one thing. Now, let's take a look at Shabbos, which is on page 410, 411. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. 6 days shall you work and accomplish all your work. But the 7th day is Shabbos to Hashem, your God. You shall not do any work. Aha. Here's a scenario that played itself out thousands of times in the United States of America, in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. The Jew who either came as a teenager from Europe to America or was born in America says to Rabbi, Rabbi, I know that you can't work on Saturdays, on the Sabbath. I know you can't do that. But people are telling me you can't strike a match. Rabbi, that's not work. That's not hard. It's real easy. You don't work up a sweat. Now, I understand in the ancient world we had to make a fire by rubbing sticks together, which isn't true, but that's what he understands. So that's very big. That's hard work. There's no question about it. But we don't do it that way, Rabbi. Why are they telling me that I can't strike a match? Well, one of the problems here is that where the English has work, 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 the Hebrew doesn't have the same word. There's different words. So if you take a look on the Hebrew side, remember the day sanctify it. 6 days shall you work, ta'avod. And you shall do all your malacha. This is called malachtecha. Avodah and malacha are not the same word, not the same root, and not the same connotation. So it's telling you that 2 things are going on during the 6 days. Avodah is going on in the 6 days, and malacha is going on in the 6 days. Aha! 2 different things are going on. I wonder which one the Torah prohibits on the 7th day. Well, just keep reading. 7th day is a Sabbath to Hashem your God. Lo saseh kol melacha. Don't do any melacha. Now it's crucial to figure out what's the difference between avodah and melacha. And if you don't know that, you don't know what it says. If you don't know what it says, don't give me your smart answers about scratching matches. Avodah is the word for effort, for strain, for using up energy and resources. Malacha is crafting something creative and purposeful using skill. A malacha is an action which is intentional, doesn't happen by accident, and it's skillful, and it's physically creative. Wow, so that's what you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Well, let's see. When you strike a match and ignite it, is that a skillful action? A person who has difficulty controlling his limbs is going to have trouble striking a match, right? And it's certainly done intentionally. You don't do it just moving your hands randomly. And it creates heat and light and combustion. So it's physically creative. According to that definition, it certainly is a malacha. It's a no-brainer. The poor American Jew who comes to the rabbi with this irony is a victim of the English text. Now, having said that, what does the word Shabbos mean? It refers to the seventh day, but what does it mean? Anybody have a clue? Except those who've heard it from me.
Cessation from work.
Okay, not quite. It doesn't mean sit. It doesn't mean seven. It doesn't mean live. It means to cease. Now, it doesn't mean cease, cessation from work, cessation from playing a game, all right, cessation from talking, but it means to stop something you were doing before. That's why Shabbos comes at the end of the week. You surely know that there are about 2 billion people on the earth, on planet Earth, who either celebrate or did celebrate or have as part of their culture to celebrate the Sabbath of the Bible on the first day of the week. Calendars in the Western world have SS. Sunday is the starting point and Saturday is the ending point. How could the biblical Sabbath be the first day of the week if word Shabbos means cessation? You could only cease what you were doing before. It's got to be the end of the week. You know how it got to be the first day of the week? Because I heard this from Usher Wade, who he was very active in a certain Protestant Christian group. He was going to Europe to do his doctorate in their theology, and he met a Ger Chassid, and that was that. And he's a rabbi, and he teaches Torah here in Yerushalayim. He said early Christians celebrated 2 holy days a week: the biblical Sabbath on Saturdays, and Sunday was the resurrection day of the founder of Christianity. When the Emperor Constantine said he was going to influence the empire to become Christian, he never became Christian. He didn't believe in it, and it was a long, gradual process. But he said to them, "You're not getting 2 days a week, choose one." So as to guarantee their distinctness, they chose Sunday, and they moved the biblical Sabbath to Sunday. That's what you call a made-up religion. It's a made-up religion. If it were divine, they wouldn't have done that. Anyway, so it's got to be at the end of the week. Now, here's the point that I want to focus on. Let's start again at verse 10. The seventh day is Shabbos, cessation day to Hashem your God. You shall not do any melacha. Now watch this list. You, your son, your daughter, your slave, meaning male slave, your maidservant, which is a female slave, your animal, and your convert within your gates. You, your son, your daughter, male slave, your female slave, your animal, and your convert within your gates. Does this list raise some questions in your mind? There are probably at least 5 questions here. Well, you're not trained to doing this. Realize you have some training that you need. Yeah.
Could you just be simpler? Just no one should do work. Why does it say you should do work? And it's
Okay, why? Fine. Why do you have a list at all? Fine. Okay, that's an interesting question. But now the content of the list. Let me ask you the first trick question. Is anybody missing from the list?
His wife.
Your wife. Bang. Right? You'll regret that. But when we get there. Fine. The wife is missing. What else?
There's, it says son and daughter, male, female, and then male slave, female slave, male. There's a gender denotation there.
Yes, gender denotation, no question about it. But you want to be neutral, hey? And you get them all in one shot and be more economical. Okay, I'll accept that. What else? Anything about the order, maybe?
This is, well, is it going down from?
Look carefully and see if you can say something more specific than that.
It's also with the son and daughter. Then it goes progressively down to then your slave and your maidservant, the animal, which is the lowest.
Yeah, but it's not the last on the list.
Oh, yeah, the convert. Yeah.
So you should ask why the animals before the convert. Hey?
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't that be an important thing to think? And then, having thought of the convert, the animal being before the convert, you could push it a little harder and ask,
Why are converts even included?
why what?
Why are converts even included? Because
Yes, you could ask that, right? Why are converts even included? Good. And you could also ask,
animal is included?
why is the animal included, hey? Does he have to keep Shabbos? So there are some problems here, right? Okay, now, the answer to all the problems is generated from one Rashi. Rashi says, when it says your son and daughter, it's referring to a minor son and a minor daughter, not adults. a son before the age of 13, and a daughter before the age of 12. Now see what you can do with answering the questions that we raised.
None of these groups are actually obligated now, but they still have to keep it, like they're under you. So in other words, we say minors aren't obligated to keep Shabbos.
It's a nice comment, but you're not answering any of the questions that we raised. You didn't put why animal is there and why animal before the convert, and
Because they're all not under the obligation to keep it themselves.
Well,
You're not obligated to make them do things for you.
neither is your house. I mean, like, neither is the king. I mean, why are you? And it starts with you, right? And to explain, well, the wife isn't there.
I mean, you have a higher obligation to make them keep it.
Well, you're guessing. Think till you have an answer, right? I mean, this is the way you should ask the question. This is a list of you and what?
Is it the ones that it's harder to make sure that they keep it to the ones that require less of
The one with the
It's
most
the ones
obligation.
that rely on you.
like a convert doesn't.
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. What you say is true, though I don't think it's the essential idea. He's close to the essential idea. What did you say?
More of an the closer to the list, the higher the obligation.
They're the ones you're responsible for. These are the people you're responsible for. Primarily responsible for your children. After that, your servants, whom you own, but they're human. After that, the animal whom you own, your property. And then, whatever responsibilities you have to the convert, he's external to your immediate responsibilities as an extended responsibility. So it's a list of responsibilities and a downward list in terms of the extent of responsibility.
Actually, it says your.
Yes, 100%. 100%, exactly. Doesn't say animal, it says your. Exactly, very good. So now how does it help with the other questions?
Yeah, convert, that's still confusing.
Let's focus on the animal for a second. What responsibilities do I have with respect to my animal vis-a-vis Shabbos?
Not making it work.
Right. I can't make it work for me on Shabbos. It can violate the Shabbos laws if it grazes in the pasture. It's cutting off or pulling up grass from where it grows, which is one of the 39 forbidden malachos, and it eats it, and perfectly all right. He doesn't think you have to keep Shabbos. But I can't make him work for me on Shabbos. For example, threshing. I saw this in 1967 in Syria, where the state of Israel conquered. They were threshing, like it says in the Mishnah. You have a pole in the ground, you have wheat scattered around the pole, then you have an animal with a string around its neck, and the string has a small loop at the end, and the loop is over the pole, and it walks round and around the pole, stepping on the wheat, and that's how the wheat is threshed. That's what was going on in 1967 in Syria. That you can't do. You cannot set up the animal to do that for you on Shabbos. That he mustn't let him do. Okay, that's why the animal's there. Now, when it comes to the convert, there are two types of converts. The word ger. One is called the ger toshav, and the other is called the ger tzedek. Ger toshav is someone who accepts the 7 categories of commandments that apply to non-Jews and lives in your community, and you have responsibility to help him if he's in danger and to save his life. And he's not a Jew, but on the other hand, he's living the way the Torah wants non-Jews to live, and he's a valued member of the community. If that's the kind of ger that the Torah is talking about here, then it follows directly, because the non-Jew also shouldn't do malacha for you on Shabbos. It's July 16th. There's a heat wave. Your petunias are wilting, and it's Saturday morning, and your next door neighbor, the ger toshav, is coming out to water his petunias because it's a terrible heat wave. And he says to you, my dear Jewish friend, neighbor, I understand that the rules are you can't water your petunias. Would you like me to water them for you? And you have to say, gee, it's sweet of you to offer. No thanks. My Sabbath doesn't allow me to accept that kind of work from a non-Jew. So then the non-Jew follows directly after the animal, because the prohibition is exactly the same kind of prohibition. And since he's not part of your household, you have more or less responsibility for him. If he does it against your will, so then he's done it. You have less responsibility for him than you do for the animal. If it's a Ger Tzedek, one who's become a Jew, then the Ramban has a very interesting point here. There are certain mitzvos which double up between born Jews and Jews who convert to Judaism. That is to say, you have a general statement which applies to all Jews, which includes converts also. And then you have a separate statement which applies specifically to the converts to tell you that you have a greater responsibility for them. There's more emphasis on them. Repeat in the Torah can mean emphasis. So you have, you should love your fellow Jew, and you should love the convert, in addition to the general love for every Jew. Altonu ishas achiv, don't hurt your fellow Jew with words, and then altonu sager, don't do that to a non-Jew as well. So Ramban says that you have to have concern and care for the Shabbos of a non-Jew. Above and beyond your responsibility for every Jew that you should help and inspire people to do mitzvos, you have to have concern specifically for the Shabbos of a non-Jew. Now, I don't remember whether the Ramban says this or I'm putting this in, but before a person becomes a Jew, he can perform all the 630 commandments but one, and he'll get reward for so doing. So says the Rambam word for word. The one he can't do is Shabbos.
Why can't he do Shabbos?
Because it says that it is an oath and a bris, it's a sign and a covenant between me and the Jewish people.
So he could do Shabbos, but it wouldn't count.
No, after the flood, it says from now on, the seasons, day and night, they will not cease. Lo yishbosu, using the same word of Shabbos. That means the non-Jewish world is not allowed to take a day off. Most hold, even if it's Thursday, they can't take a full day off. Not allowed to. They have to work continuously. So this is the one Jewish mitzvah that this convert has never done before. Now, what do? Okay, they do 98%. They do one malacha to make sure that they violated it halachically. Still, it's the mitzvah that they have never been, never. So the Torah is telling us that you have a special responsibility for the non-Jew who becomes a Jew in terms of his Shabbos, because his relationship to Shabbos is different from the relationship of a born Jews in terms of Shabbos. Now we were left with only one question, boys and girls. What about where the wife is? What's the right answer? Think carefully.
She's part of you.
The word you includes the wife. Who said it was masculine? I told you you're going to pay for it. Who said it was masculine? Hey, a little creeping chauvinism here? Not in our circles. And that's the trick from Rashi. Since the son and daughter are minors, that means that adults have their own responsibility. Son and daughter are mentioned separately, aren't they? Both the boy and the girl. You might have had the same chauvinism if it doesn't say boys and girls. You think it's only men. No, it's everybody's equal in this. So the you includes the wife. Also, she's there just as much as you're there. She's not there as your wife. She's there as a Jewish woman who has her own responsibility to keep Shabbos.
So the Hebrew use plural in this sense? Or is it you means?
No, here it's all singular.
It's all singular?
But the singular can refer to the nation. We saw that last night, Friday night, right? Because, Thursday night, because you had four plural verbs and then a singular verb. We went through this. We talked about unity of the nation, right? And that was the nations get both singular and plural usages. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you also have an obligation though to people who aren't your children, who are also under the age of bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah? So if, for instance, if my neighbor's child was violating Shabbos, I still have to inform them that they're violating Shabbos. That wouldn't fall within this, though.
Yes, but we were talking here on a level of comparative responsibility. And your primary responsibility is to your children, even before your grandchildren and before your great-grandchildren. And here the word ben and bas could include future generations, but it doesn't have to. So they're not specific. In the midst of teaching Torah to your progeny, it said 3 different verses. One says son, and one says grandson, and one says students. And it's in that order. So you do have a special responsibility to your own children.
But it's not included within this. It's a separate thing, as in, this list wouldn't include those. Is there other responsibilities that exist that are outside this list? That's what I'm trying to ask.
I'm not getting it.
So we have, based on what the list we have, there are other responsibilities to also You also have an obligation to make sure that other people don't violate Shabbos, such as someone else's children, even though they're not on this list. Or I'm asking, is that
Yeah,
not
so
an
that's
obligation?
because this list is primary and the other people are secondary.
Okay.
What about like orphan children? Like who takes care of making sure they keep Shabbos?
So first of all, this is a very important fundamental principle here. The Jewish people as a family are all descended from Jacob.
Mhm.
So there's always a relative. There's always a relative. The only person who doesn't have that is someone who converts.
Okay, gotcha.
Doesn't have a relative. So they would fall mostly on the closest relative. But if there aren't relatives, then the court of the city takes responsibility to house, to feed, to instruct the orphans. That's definitely true. The first yeshivas were made 2,000 years ago by, I forget who, and he made it for orphans, specifically, because they didn't have parents to teach them.
So is it even your son and your daughter, since they have like specific mitzvahs that they will eventually perform regarding Shabbos? Is it why like the candles, like it's a mitzvah for?
No, you instruct them and you train them in the performance of Shabbos.
But then why isn't like your offspring? Like why is this?
Again, because this is in order of responsibility. This is it's not a total list. It's not a complete list of all your responsibilities.
Right.
But these are the closest ones to you, and this is an order of responsibility.
Is there an implication that you have more responsibility for your son than your daughter, or?
No,
Okay.
no. The Chazal say, you can't say two words at the same time. So when there's nothing in the text which enforces order, then you don't read it in terms of order. If you know externally, you are required to use logic in interpreting the text. So anybody thinks that, well, I couldn't say son and daughter together with animal because I can't say two things at the same time, so therefore son and daughter and animal are equal, he needs help. He needs serious help. The Saadia Gaon's example of this, this is just to show you how you have to read, right? Adam called his wife's name Chava, which means life, because he Haisa Eim Kol Chai. She was the mother of all life. Oh, she was the mother of the squirrels, right? No, come on, don't be stupid. We don't mean animal life. I see. She was Adam's mother, right? No, not Adam's mother. Wait a minute. She was her own mother. No, don't be, what kind of idiot are you? We don't mean that. We mean the great female ancestor of all the rest of the human. That's what it means, right? You need a commentator to tell you that? Are we fooling with the text to make it consistent? So you're not going to compare people and animals in any respect whatsoever, and you're not going to compare your flesh and blood with slaves whom you own. So, but male and female, it's not going to be any difference.
Why does it state? Why does it say children? Why does it have to specify son and then daughter? And also it seems.
I answered that because the same chauvinistic attitude will say, if you don't mean say son and daughter, you'll think that it's only men.
I see. And then but also it goes in order. I mean, it goes into an order which seems to be descending to a certain extent. We said son, daughter, then slave, then mates with an animal, and then the convert.
Well,
does that not show a decline in responsibility throughout the list, or?
No, it can go in pairs.
Oh, you're saying that the responsibility goes in pairs then?
You're not going to compare. You're not going to pair the animal with a convert.
Yeah.
So where there's reason to pair them, we pair them. Where there's not. You don't want to go in the opposite direction, but it can be equal. So son and daughter are equal. Male servant and maid servant are equal, and then the animal is lower, and then the.
What's your reason for suggesting pairs as opposed to just taking it individually as an order for each one?
Because then you would have to enforce that the male is more important than the female, and that's not true.
We don't.
So what?
I know. I agree. I was just saying, I understand.
Yeah.
And then also the other thing I had as well was, based on what I asked before about these are the primary obligations, and then we mentioned the secondary obligations to other things. Would that mean that you have more of an obligation to make sure your animal doesn't work on Shabbos than you would for someone else's child?
Well, let's put it this way. You have more responsibility in the sense that you have more, almost always, you have more influence, and you're more responsible for failure if it doesn't happen. If somebody else's child, you can only be secondary, because he is primary responsible for it. If it's orphans, that's something else. But then responsibility for an orphan would trump, obviously, slaves and animals and even convert, because he can take care of himself. So, okay, so that's what's going on here. Now, I want to point out one more thing here, which is not usually mentioned. Let's go to verse 11. You shouldn't do any malacha, you and all the people on the list. 4. In 6 days Hashem made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is there, that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Now, we're so familiar with this text. You know, I had a teacher once who said, many texts suffer from over-familiarity. They're so familiar, you don't realize how strange they are. Let's see. You shouldn't do malacha on the 7th day because when God created the world, he stopped bringing new categories of physical things into existence on the 7th day. Really? I should do what he did? He did it and I should do it? Is that obvious? Why should I do what he does? If there had been a principle written in the Torah, don't fool yourself. You can't imitate God. God is infinite and you're finite. God transcends the spiritual, let alone the physical. And you are spiritual and physical. There's no analogy between you and God whatsoever. Don't even dream that you should do something that God would do. We would all nod our heads and say, of course, of course. Simple, the easiest logic, elementary, right? So here when the Torah tells you the opposite, your hair on a stand on end. What? I should do what he does? And this is a deep, consistent Torah principle. And it's based on a verse that you all know. God made man. B'Tselem Elokim Asa Has Adam. Now, it doesn't mean image. The first chapter of the guide, Maimonides expatiates on that in detail. But there's some sharing of essence, some sharing of form, some sharing of character that he created. Only man. Not angels, not animals, nothing else was made b'Tselem Elokim. Well, if there's that kind of link between us and God, then maybe, just maybe, it would be appropriate for us to do something analogous to what God did. But that's playing itself out here. Read barely, read without context, and read without presuppositions, you could hear this as a very surprising reason for the mitzvah. Okay, now, one piece of philosophy. 409. 407. Very beginning. Verse 2 in chapter 20. I am Hashem your God, who was taking you out of the land of Egypt and the house of slavery. Oh, I missed it. Okay. Is that a commandment? No. Not obviously. It's a statement of fact. It's not in the imperative mood. It doesn't tell you to do something. Now, there are those who want to see it as a commandment. That is to say, maybe I should say, they want to see that there's a commandment associated with those words. And the commandment is to believe in God. After all, belief in God is the linchpin of the whole system. If you don't believe in God, there can't be any commandments because there's no commander. So the whole system is based on that. Sure, that ought to be there right at the top of the list. There's a certain logic in that. But there is an objection, which a number of sources bring, a straightforward logical objection. Now, I'll tell you what they say, and then I'll tell you how I spell it out. What they say is this: a commandment presupposes the existence of the commander, and therefore it cannot be the content of the command to believe in the commander. Full stop. So I read that and I thought, boy, that sounds interesting, sounds smart. I wonder what it means. So I worked it out in my tedious method of working it down to the details. I want to explain it in detail because I want the idea to be as clear as I can make it. Let's imagine there were a commandment to believe in God. And let's ask, would it be possible to deliberately disobey that commandment? Let's think what deliberate disobedience means. You have two guys in the army, the Israeli army. One is a soldier from Ethiopia, and he's got a rank, a commander of some kind. And there's a new recruit from Russia. Okay? Now, the Ethiopian gives an order to the Russian, shut the door. The Russian hears, open the window, or something else, with that kind of accent. And he doesn't do what he was ordered to do. Did he deliberately disobey the order?
No.
Surely not. He didn't understand the order. He didn't deliberately disobey it because he didn't even receive it. Okay, another example. Suppose Reuben and Shimon enter the army at the same time, and they're on the same base, and Shimon goes home for a week, comes back, and as he comes onto the base, Reuben says, I order you to shut the door. And Shimon, being Israeli soldier, says, drop dead, I'm tired, let me put my stuff away. And Reuben says, I order you to shut the door. Now, poor Shimon doesn't know that in the week that he's been away, Reuben's been promoted. He has rank. He can give orders. Shimon doesn't know that. He thinks that Reuben's just joking. Is Shimon deliberately disobeying an order? Surely not, because he doesn't think it's an order. In order to deliberately disobey an order, you have to understand it, and you have to know that there is an appropriate authority behind it, which makes it a legitimate order. Okay? Now, here we are with the commandment to believe in the existence of God. Could you deliberately disobey that? Well, if you don't believe in God, you don't believe it's an order, because there's no authority behind it, because it was just made up. For this to be an order with a legitimate authority, it has to come from God. If you don't believe in God, then you don't recognize that it's an order. So you couldn't deliberately disobey it. You're not able to deliberately disobey it. Okay, now let's try the positive side. Could you deliberately obey it? What does it mean to deliberately obey an order? Well, the order is issued, and the soldier thinks, okay, you gave me an order. What shall I do now? That's the Israeli order. He said to close the door. Let's see what my options are. By the way, you have the Golan Heights because the armistice was signed on Friday afternoon, and a whole group of soldiers said, we're not stopping. We're not letting them have the Golan Heights. We're not doing that. So we took the Hermon on Shabbos because they were firing from us from there. They just didn't obey the order. Okay, so you have to picture a person. He hears the order and he thinks, shall I do it or shall I not do it? Makes a decision. Okay, but now part of relating to an order is realizing it's an order. So if there's a commandment to believe in God, for him to accept it as an order, he's got to believe that God is commanding it. Can he now decide, perhaps, to disobey it, since he's already believing in God? That option isn't open to him. He's already fulfilled it. So you try to imagine a commandment to believe in God. It can be neither deliberately obeyed nor deliberately disobeyed. Well, the function of a command is to affect your action, to let you know that someone in authority wants this done, and there are certain prizes and penalties if you do it or you don't do it. A commandment to believe in the existence of God couldn't do that. It couldn't have that function. That's a good reason to think that it's not a commandment. Yeah.
Could they be violating, to a certain extent, the conditions that would allow them to believe? So let's say you have a non-religious person. They say, but if I read, Reason to Believe by Rabbi Gottlieb, I would become religious, and therefore they don't read it. Would that be a violation of that commandment?
100%. That Rav Elchanan Wasserman has an essay where he uses that kind of reasoning. If you don't, but the reason is correct, but the point of access to the subject is not the right access. That doesn't make it into a commandment. That makes the person guilty. I think the next step I'm taking out my own, and because I'm a philosopher, I'm prejudiced. But I think if you can't be responsible to believe in God, then you can't be responsible to fulfill the whole tradition. Where do responsibilities come from? If you think that all responsibilities are due to divine commandments, you have a problem. Because the linchpin of the system can't be made responsible by a commandment. There can't be a commandment to believe in God. But the Torah recognizes obligations which aren't commanded. Those of you with me in the Rambam shir, you know very well, the Rambam says, something that logic tells you you must do. If you do it, you'll be rewarded. Logic tells you you mustn't do it, and you do it, you'll be punished. God rewards and punishes things that are logically required. I think the existence of God is logically required. That's where this comes in. Since it's logically required, and since your beautifully constructed, realistic case that he knows there's a book called Reason to Believe, and he knows that if he really believes it, he's going to have to give up cheeseburgers. So he says, no, I'm not reading that book. We had a guy like that. A guy who saw where the ball was rolling, and he said he's leaving the yeshiva because he doesn't want to go any further. At that point in time, Rabbi Rosenberg was here. Rabbi Rosenberg was self-made, wealthy, and he did a great deal of charity. And the guy was going to leave, so they took him into Rabbi Rosenberg's office. Rabbi Rosenberg said, "You're leaving?" Yeah, I see where this is going. I don't want to be part of it, and so on and so on. Rabbi Rosenberg said, "If I give you $1 million, will you stay?" The guy said, don't make fun of me, Rabbi. Takes out his check, takes out his checkbook. He writes $1 million. He says, "I'll put your name. What's your name?" The guy gave a yell and ran out of the office because he almost got caught. He almost got caught. Yes, we have that kind of reaction often enough. They sort of sense where it's going, and they see that they're not going to get out of it. So or they get nervous. They start inventing all sorts of excuses. My cousin's calling me and is sick in America. They make things up. Anyway, but the point is, I think that logic and philosophy really are the foundation of the whole system. Then, because through that kind of reasoning and investigation, you can come to grounds for believing in God, and that's the foundation of the whole system. And that's a very, very important example of a general rule, which the system itself says. I just told you what the Rambam says, and I'll tell you what Shemesh Kop says. Shemesh Kop, he wrote a sefer called Sha'arei Yosher, which is the legal and textual analysis of Jewish civil and criminal law. But he has an introduction, and very often the introductions have nothing to do with the book. The introduction is an opportunity for him to write about moral issues and philosophical issues and metaphysical issues, and they just use that as an opportunity to express their views of those and that kind of thing. Now, one of the things he says in the introduction there is that, this is in Shar Daled Perek Beis, the fourth section of the book, the second chapter. My oldest son showed me this. He asked the following question. You're not allowed to steal other people's property. Which way does it go? Is it that God says, here are things you mustn't steal. If it's in his yard, if it's in his, if he's holding onto it in his hand, he gives a whole list of conditions and says, don't steal them. And then from the rules of what you shouldn't steal, you learn what property is. Property is that stuff which God told you not to steal. That's one possibility. Or no, property is property, and you have an intuitive understanding of what counts as property, and God said, don't steal other people's property. Which comes first, the property identity, and then the prohibition, or the prohibition, and that what creates the idea of property? So if you are a certain type of pietistic, simplistic thinker, you say, God creates everything, God makes everything, nothing's independent of God, must be, he told you not to take these and these things, and then that defines what property is. So Shemesh Kop says, no, the opposite. Property is intuitive, you understand it well, and God said, don't steal other people's property. And he said, to what is this comparable? To the number of statements in our tradition which say that one reason why you're obligated to do what God says is gratitude. Because of all of the great things that he's done for you, you owe him a debt of gratitude. Now let's stop and think. It's the moral obligation of recognizing gratitude that is a reason to fulfill God's commandments. Where does the obligation for fulfilling debts of gratitude come from? Where does that obligation come from? You can't say it comes from the Torah. You can't say it's a mitzvah because now you've gone around in a circle. Let me make this dramatic. We're talking to an outsider. Here's this system. Uh-huh. Very nice. Have a nice day. No, no, no. You have to take this system seriously. Oh, really? Why should I do that? I'm outside. I'm not committed to any of it. I'll tell you why. Because there's a creator who manages the universe, and you owe him a lot, and morally, you have a responsibility to recognize your debts of gratitude. That's supposed to speak to me. Now, if I ask, and what is the source of the obligation to pay debts of gratitude? He says, because it's written in the Torah right here. He's going to lose the battle, right? Because I'm standing outside. I don't recognize the validity of the Torah. I need a reason to buy into the whole system. So it's got to be that the obligation to pay debts of gratitude pre-exists the system. It's outside the system. Shimon Shkub says the same thing is true with respect to property and theft. The idea of property pre-exists the system, and God says don't steal other people's property. But here you see a direct explanation. And by the way, this is the example of the kind of philosophy you can find in a legalist in our tradition, where philosophy is relevant to the point. They do excellent philosophy. Just don't do it only philosophy. So the idea is that there are obligations that are external, and the existence of God is one which is perforce external and is the source of the entire system, and therefore it's a very important piece of Jewish life. Yeah.
One of the arguments for the existence of God, and this logic is logic that I personally has always made sense to me, is that there, without the fact that without a higher power, namely God, having declared certain things to be moral rules, then what makes that then they, why should they be right or wrong? Why should any morality exist at all?
Okay, so now first of all, I would have you pay careful attention to your own words. Your words ask a question. They don't state a conclusion. One might suggest that there is an answer to the question which you haven't seen yet. Do you have any reason to think there can't be an answer to that question? We haven't got any good reason, because there isn't any good reason. So all you can say is that perhaps philosophy and thinkers haven't agreed upon a source for morality without God, but many have tried. And I heard someone speaking the other day, and he said, every philosopher has agreed with me that if there is no God, there's no morality. Well, that's just bunk. Many philosophers worked on systems that had no reference to God whatsoever, and they were not challenged, without God you can't have a system. It's simply not true. So there's no good reason to think there can't be objective morality without God. Even if we haven't found it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's one thing. And the other thing is, both sides of the equation are difficult. You said there has to be a power. I think what you need to consider is what feature or features of God make his command morally binding. Certainly it's not power. Just because he is all-powerful, therefore what he says is morally right, might makes right. The more power people have, the more moral they are automatically. That doesn't seem to be correct. He knows everything. Well, he may know everything, but that doesn't mean that when he says something, it becomes right because he says so. What could possibly make his statement that when something should be done or shouldn't be done, make it morally right because it's coming from him? Now, there's an answer to the question, but the answer kills the position. The answer is because he's morally perfect. And when a morally perfect being speaks it, then that establishes that it is true. But now you had to acknowledge the concept of morality before he speaks. So it's got to have an independent existence above and beyond his speaking. So neither side of this equation is correct, I think, in philosophical terms, and the situation is more complicated than that. Now, this is all on tape. I've done this, and there's a positive side that has to be said, which I'm obviously not going to do tonight. Well, I could do it tomorrow night if you ask me in Q&A. But I know it's a very useful argument, you know. If you really think the Nazis are evil, you got to believe in God, because otherwise everything's up for grabs, and so on and so on. Poor, I think it was Dostoevsky who said, if there is no God, everything's permitted. You get the irony? He may have been a great writer, but he was a terrible philosopher. Permitted is a moral term, excuse me. It means morally permissible to do so. What he meant to say is that if there's no God, there's no morality. If he says permitted, he just contradicted himself. Okay, so I'm a logician. I pay attention to those things. What can I do? At any rate, I don't think that logic goes through. And if it means that you have to graduate from that stepping stone to another stepping stone, which is more solid, it may be painful, but you'll have to do it because it's not correct. Okay.